Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. Now, I have a very special guest for you today, but he is generally considered to be highly controversial. So I have taken one of the most controversial people of his generation. So I have taken the precaution of asking him to disguise himself with an amusing fake moustache. And so that he doesn't feel left out, I have also donned an amusing fake moustache. And we're not going to use his name. We're going to call him Master Nicholas Fountain. So while I sign into the old entropy, I'm going to ask Master Fountain to introduce himself. So Master Fountain, over to you.
All right. Well, hello, Ed, and hello to everybody in the audience. Great to be with you. I'm Nicholas Fuentes. But we're using the disguise. I host the show America First on cozy.tv, and it's a pleasure to join you here this afternoon.
No, I've been very, very interested for many years in what's been going on your way, because as I was saying to you before the show, it is my children are a bit younger than you, so they can't articulate what it's like to being brought up in clown world. But you're old enough, whatever you are, 21 or something, 23, whatever you are. You're old enough to be able to articulate what that's like. So maybe I should before I go into that though, can I start with this, which is how did you go? When I was your kind of age, I was interested in the forbidden things, but I managed to stop myself through sort of effortful control from the age of 14 to the age of 31. From looking into the forbidden things. So what was it with you? How did you go? You were, let's say you're at school, you're 14 or 15 or something. What was your thinking that you managed to do this?
Sure. So I was always interested in politics, I think, from the time I was around 11 or 12 years old. But my politics were never very controversial. You know, I got into it by reading Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman. I was a libertarian throughout high school. I read all the literature on that. And it wasn't until I got into college that I really started to get into, like you say, this more forbidden kinds of things. And, you know, honestly, it wasn't even an intentional or deliberate thing, but I always wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know what was going on. And I mean, that's where that inquiry led me, was towards controversial subjects. And I never really thought twice about it. And at the time, I didn't really even fully understand the consequences, which I think is true of a lot of people my age. Is you start to go down a certain rabbit hole and maybe you don't even realize, what the sort of social professional ramifications are until it's too late for some people. Not saying that I would have done something differently, but I was in college. Like I said, I always had this interest in politics. And at this time in 2016, that's when I got into college during the election. That's when there was this big conversation going on about what is the right wing going to be in America. Is it going to be the same Bush, Rubio type stuff, or is it going to be Donald Trump? And then there were even other people that came on the scene at that time, like I know a lot of people discovered Jared Taylor and Gavin McInnes and Peter Brimelow, and lots of new voices. And so there was a lot of novel new ideas I hadn't heard before, which I explored, I think, like a lot of people during that time. And that's where the truth led me. And so, I never really, like I said, thought so much about the consequences. I was more interested in the truth and sort of riding the Trump wave. And well, here I am now, and fully enjoying the consequences.
Well, indeed. Well, cheers, everybody. Cheers. Don't make silly comments in the stream, please. Cheers, everybody. Cheers, John Smith. Cheers, Hibernian Perspective. Cheers, anti-peanut butter. Cheers, the Candy Lady. And so forth. Cheers, everybody, and welcome to Slanger Pagan Tree, and welcome to the Jolly Heretic. If you're new, we are, of course, an online public house that meets on Mondays and Thursdays. Edward Redbeard, cheers. John McLean, cheers. That meets on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, in which we discuss based science, based history, that kind of thing. And occasionally I sort of go off on a tangent from my normal discussion of academic stuff, which gets suppressed by our woke-aversities, interviewing noteworthy cultural figures. And a lot of you, cheers, Alexi and Louisa Yalonen, and cheers, have been asking me to get this young fellow on. I feel so terribly old saying that, but it is true. For quite a while, and so I thought I would do so, and jolly interesting. So, can you tell me a bit about your what's your sort of background? I don't really know that much. You're from Illinois, I believe. That's right.
Yes. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. And I don't really have too much of a background. I've been doing this for 5 years, almost exactly now. I think it'll be my 5-year anniversary doing my show on Sunday or Monday. And so 5 years ago, I was 18. I was in my first year in college, my second semester. So really, I went from high school to this. So professionally, I don't have really much of a background aside from what I've always done here, which is my show. But aside from that, yeah, that was my upbringing, was suburbs of Chicago.
If you have any questions, of course, for Mr. Fountain, then do send them in on the link below on Entropy or on the old YouTube, and we will, of course, answer them today. So you can send them in there if you have any questions for Mr. Fountain. And so I understand your background, Roman Catholic, your Catholic background. Did that play much of a part in your thinking or your development? Was it a rebellion against it, or was it a desire towards it, or is Catholicism significant in any way?
So yes, I was born and raised Catholic, although like a lot of American Catholics, I grew up sort of lapsed, so to speak. You know, my parents, I mean, they believe in God and they are Catholic. And there was a time when we went to mass every Sunday, but, I think that sort of fell off when I was very young. But I went to, CCD. I got confirmed in the Catholic Church and everything. But it never really was actually a very strong part of my identity or part of my political thinking. I always believe in God. I was always a Christian, but I wasn't really Catholic in any meaningful way. I was sort of like a lot of lapsed American Catholics, just sort of vaguely Christian. And like I said, I was a libertarian throughout high school. It wasn't until college where it started to play a bigger role, and I became more of a reactionary, more of a real, an actual conservative. And that's
what was it that brought that about? Do you think? What was it about? So you're 19 years old or whatever, 18 years old. You're starting college. Were you at something like an all boys school or something like that, or were you at a normal mixed school?
No, I was at a normal school. I was at Boston University.
Okay, so it's not a dramatic. No, I mean school. I mean like school, like not like public school.
Oh yeah, I went to a public school. It was co-ed. Yeah, it was.
So no big dramatic change. Like for me, I went to an all boys school, and suddenly I was at university, and there were girls. Jeez. Yeah. So no big dramatic change or whatever. You go to Boston. So what was it then that sort of sparked off this passion?
Well, it was I think it was really the nihilism of college. Because I was in college, and I think people know the American college scene. It's drugs, it's sex, it's alcohol, it's all these things, which I was never interested in any of that. I didn't go to one party when I was in college, didn't have any relationships or anything like that. And actually, I was just sort of stuck in my dorm room all the time. I didn't even really go to class, but I would sleep at weird hours. I would wake up. I'd try to get food. I was a broke college kid, and the thing is, like, the cafeteria was closed all throughout the night. And that's when I was awake. I was asleep all day, up all night. So I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. And, I was there in college and thinking, is this all there is to life? Is just sort of sleeping and eating and kind of socializing and things. And so I was asking these questions really about what really is the point of it all. And it led me, but without getting into too much detail, towards this idea that, there must be meaning in life. I thought if all that we're trying to do in life is this sort of utilitarian sort of thing, this hedonism where we're trying to maximize our comfort, minimize discomfort. I said, well, we should basically just quit while we're ahead, because there's only discomfort in store throughout a person's life. They get older, their mind deteriorates, their loved ones die, people they know die, they die. So I thought, if that's the whole point of it all is just to maximize comfort, well, probably should be euthanized at like 25 or something. And I thought, well, people aren't doing that. That's not very rational. Common sense would say we're not doing that. Well, why is that? And that's because there's more to life than pleasure seeking. There's more to life than comfort. There's more to life than material things. There's actually immaterial things too. There's the soul. Meaning is not subjective. There's objectively meaning in the world. And so that's when I got more into religion, and I stared searching. And Catholicism.
Did you ever have? Sorry to interrupt. Did you ever have what one might call a religious experience?
No, I've never had a religious experience. It was really just sort of, logically, I just sort of arrived at the idea that, we have an appetite for meaning because there is meaning. We have an appetite for eternal life because there is eternal life. And I wish I had a religious experience. It would probably make me more pious, but no, it was always just, I just thought about these things a lot. And Catholicism seems to me to be the most comprehensive sort of explanation for it all.
But you've really, Catholicism, why Catholicism in particular?
Well, in particular, because if you look at all the different religions, I'm a Christian because I believe that Christ actually did get crucified and resurrected. And so if that's the case, if Christ was resurrected, then he was a son of God. And then between the different Christian denominations, Catholicism is just the only serious one. It's the only one that has apostolic succession. It's the only one that has papal primacy and authority, interpreting the doctrine. And I get into this a lot on my show, why I'm not a Protestant, why I'm not Eastern Orthodox. Fundamentally, I don't think the doctrine of Christianity could be protected in the world without institutional authority, which only the Catholic Church has.
Although it's going pretty woke these days, though, isn't it? With this foot washing virtue signaler as the anti-pope.
Yeah. I believe me, I'm not a fan of any of that stuff. But the papacy and the Catholic Church is bigger than the partisan politics, which are particular for the current pope. I'm not a fan of that by any stretch of the imagination. But I like about Catholicism that it's not like democratic. It's not like some kind of civic thing. And I feel like too many Catholics treat it like that. They look at the Pope and they say, oh, he said something I don't like. He did something I don't like. Yeah, well, he's the Pope. So that's the authority and people have to respect it. And there's something refreshing about that as opposed to this like opinion polling stuff. And, oh, we don't like someone. Let's vote him out. I have an idea. I know better. We need someone else. So there's something nice about the resignation that this is the power structure. This is the authority. Respect it. That's how it is.
I see. Now, one thing that that was I was going to ask. So, as I say, my kids are too young to kind of articulate this. You're old enough. So, what I mean, as I was saying to you before the show, I think I was brought up at the absolute tail end of a conservative society, in the sense that I still had teachers that were born in the 30s, and when I was at primary school, I had teachers that were born in the 20s. So people that had suffered, through war and privation and whatever. By the time you're knocking about, it's teachers born in the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s, and they're decadent and whatever. And so what is school like now? I was saying to you before the show that when my history teacher in 1998 said, "Boys, we heard this word taboo," and he goes, "Boys, what's an example of a taboo?" And someone goes, "Homosexuality," and he sort of, yeah, homosexuality, it's very much taboo. And I remember my history teacher saying, basically, boys, Goering was a fat queer. Now, he wouldn't get away with saying that now. I mean, someone would complain or whatever. And I had a boy at school, and he was called Sang Bum Lee. He was Korean. And he was annoying my teacher, Dr. Harvey. Dr. goes, "Sang Bum, you're a pain in the sang bum." And that would be regarded now as culturally insensitive. So what's it? Can you kind of give me, as a 41-year-old, a sense of what school was like in the mid 2000s or whatever it was, in the 2000s when you were there?
Yeah, it was. It's funny that you say that you were sort of the last, the closing years of normalcy, but I feel like that was the case for me. Certainly the 2000s and 2010s, early 2010s weren't a normal time, relatively speaking, but things have really changed in the past 7 years, especially, I would say, since the Trump election. Because, growing up, when I was in school, it was still relatively normal. There was this, inclusivity stuff and racial sensitivity. And the gay thing didn't really start to take off until, like, I would say around 2010, 2011 is when, culturally speaking, that became very relevant with, like Lady Gaga and shows like Glee. But prior to that, I didn't even really know what homosexuality was. It's just something that really wasn't talked about. It was sort of interesting because I lived in like a white, sort of affluent suburb. My family wasn't affluent, but it was, again, relatively sort of an affluent suburb, high property taxes, nice school, mostly white. And even though most people had sort of a liberal disposition, like there's this put on sort of affected liberal politics because that's what was seen as popular or politically correct, there still is this very strong conservative streak, which is interesting. But nevertheless, so it really wasn't until, I would say, the early 2010s that this stuff started to metastasize. And then it wasn't until 2016 when it just went all the way with BLM and trans.
What do you think? What do you think? I've asked a few people about this, but what do you think kind of congealed or came together in the early 2010s to result in this shift?
Well, you had the Obama administration, which is a big part of it. Really, I think it was, I don't know. It's tough because you could say that it was liberal hegemony over the media, but they had that for a long time. You could say it was like liberal politics, but again, George W. Bush is really a liberal. Perhaps it was the internet. I mean, maybe because it seems that it's just around about the time that social media, not the internet, but social media and mobile smartphones, it seems to have coincided with that. So maybe there's something there. And also it had been a progression. It's not like it just came out of nowhere. There was, I wasn't alive really or conscious in the 90s, but, there was a general move towards more acceptability for those kinds of things in the 1990s and 2000s. And, maybe it was just one of those things where its time had come, it had culminated over decades. Maybe because it was a new generation raised liberal, maybe they were ready to accept it explicitly and openly and fully. So maybe it's something like that.
Did you ever see the cartoon? It's a 90s cartoon, Daria.
No.
No, well, you should have a look at it. But in that cartoon, the kind of perspective that is now the dominant perspective is still a bit marginalized. She's the person that's bullied and excluded at school. She's the weirdo, And now her viewpoint is this sort of cynicism of truth and of anything conservative is just dominant. And that shift, as you say, I think social media allowed these mobs, these self-righteous mobs, rather like the self-righteous mobs that used to smash up Catholic churches in Geneva in the Reformation. It allowed these mobs a new means of getting together, and it was something about that that's been very, very, very negative. And it's made the world closer in a way. Like anybody can get in touch with a celebrity. Anyone can go online and tweet to a celebrity, and that celebrity might respond. When I was a kid, if you wanted to meet a celebrity, you'd hang around outside a studio and get their autograph. That was the nearest you would do. And now you can interact. It's made the world like a village. It's got a very bad side to it. But yeah, that's very, very interesting. The other thing that I wanted many things, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that I have a bit of a theory. Well, me and colleagues, Bruce Charlton is one, about the nature of genius. And not just genius, semi-genius, being unusual, being creative, being a mover and a shaker. That one of the things that it is associated with is reasonably high intelligence plus what we call developmental instability. And this normally reflects itself in sort of psychopathic personality traits to a certain extent. So low agreeableness, therefore you don't care about offending people, so you critique the status quo and come up with new ideas. Low conscientiousness, therefore you're not very rule following, so you think outside the box, you conceive of new things. And this is the nature of genius. And I recently published a book about it's over here, on the relationship between being born prematurely and genius. It's here it is. You see, they're sent before their time, and it's basically developmental instability plus intelligence. Now, you, as I understand it, were born via IVF, and I have a bit of a theory that in the future we're going to see quite a lot of IVF movers and shakers, because you've got intelligent parents that delay having children quite a long time because they want to be rich, and so then they have to have IVF, and that's combined with the developmental instability of IVF. So what are your thoughts on this whole IVF and the sort of impact and whatever?
It's interesting. I haven't really given it too much thought, this test tube baby thing. And my parents, they did IVF because my mom actually had trouble. She had, I don't know the science of it, but, reproductive trouble. And so, they tried to have kids for about 10 years. My parents were actually pretty old when they had me, and I have a twin sister, which is common with IVF. I think my father was 36 and my mom was 34, and they got married 10 years before I was born. So they had tried for a full decade. And it wasn't until they sort of got the money together and figured out there was going to be no other option, and this IVF thing was sort of new at the time, that happened. And yeah, I would agree. I think there's definitely something to that about developmental instability. I'm not really a science guy and about how an early birth or an IVF birth would affect people, but certainly from a social point of view, there was some developmental instability too. But yeah, I think there's probably something to that, high IQ combined with these other factors. But it wasn't very conscious, because I don't think I even knew I was a test tube baby until later on. And of course, you don't really understand what that means also until later. So I don't really think too much about it, but yeah, seems interesting.
Well, I personally, it's my own personal thing. But the problem is that they only started it in 1986. So they haven't. There's a British girl that was the first IVF baby. So we haven't got enough of them yet. You know, they are most in their early 30s to see how they're going to pan out. But that's that's my thinking. I think that there's Billie Eilish. Those are the only two famous IVF children that I'm aware of. And if you think about the nature of the fame, it's not like famous for being a run-of-the-mill politician or something, is it? It's famous for being this dissident in your case, or this sort of crazy nihilist in the case with green hair. In the case of the opposite of you, the anti-you, really. In the case, you and her should get together, and it would be an interesting, you could chat about what it's like to be born via IVF, and see if you hit it off. But it's I think it's an interesting area. So I mean, if you don't mind me asking, so how old were you when they told you you were born via this process?
I don't remember. Probably when I was like 10 or something around there. It wasn't sort of like a shocking revelation. It never really meant much to me. So I can imagine maybe some people have like an existential crisis, like they're told they're being adopted or something. I was like, oh, okay, but I didn't really understand it until later, until, of course you go through puberty and you start to understand sex and everything. But, it didn't really mean much to me when I was younger.
Yes, presumably it would be something if it was donor sperm. That would be a major thing, wouldn't it? But if it's as long as it's just your father being sent to a room to produce his essence, then it's a more reasonable thing. No, but I do think that's going to be it's terrible that I'll be too old to see it, but I do think that's going to be I predict here, folks. I do think that this is going to be a thing, because it's developmental instability plus people who is it that delays their fertility? If they've got endometriosis or something, then it hits in let's say, I don't know, 35, or I don't know, and they've left it till they're 32 to start trying, because they've spent all of their 20s concentrating on their careers because they're middle class. And then that's the only people that can afford IVF in America anyway, middle class people. It costs how many thousand per cycle. And so I think that you're going to see that. But anyway, I just think it's a jolly interesting thing. Now, one thing is that you're known, of course, for your controversial hot takes. So what would you say would be the opinion that has got you in the most stum?
Trouble. It's probably everything about the Jews. That's probably the biggest thing, because people can
steady on. We call them the Swedes about the Swedes.
The Swedes, right? Yeah. Almost everything else, I really don't get too much pushback, and there's actually pretty widespread agreement on most of what I say on my show with everything else. But it's the Swedish dilemma, which seems to be the biggest one. And that's because it's so real. It's because it's so real, particularly, well, in all of American politics, but in conservative politics, it's overwhelming. And it's very personal. And you'd be surprised. You don't have to go very far to start to see this, because when I was in high school and I started learning about this, towards the end of high school, beginning of college, I thought, oh, come on, there can't possibly this sort of conspiracy. I had the same reaction most normal people do. And you find you really don't have to go very far in politics. Like it's not many steps removed from like getting involved in a campaign, like ground level politics, and then coming up against this very, very apparent dynamic in American politics. And that's why you're not allowed to even, that's really where the line is. That's one thing. I don't care how based people are. If they're accepted by the system, if they're on social media, if they're working in conservative politics for some, media conglomerate, that's the one thing they can't even approach. There's a lot of stuff you could sort of dog whistle and get away with, the race stuff, fascism, religion. Matt Walsh, who works for Daily Wire, he says, I'm a theocratic fascist. Well, you can never say he's like a theocratic Nazi. You can never say that. And he even got in trouble at Daily Wire for saying that we shouldn't go fight and die in wars for Israel. So that seems to be the biggest one.
Sweden.
That's right. For Sweden.
I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that the Swedes that live in Sweden, they tend to be more open to discussing this, because I don't know, they've kind of suffered and they're under attack from the Norwegians, and so they feel if I say to them, look, there's evidence that you're very high in ethnocentrism, you Swedes, you're a very ethnocentric Nordic people, then they will say, yeah, we are, yeah. And the reason we are is because of our marriage customs, because of our history of getting our pastors to have lots of children, because of just genetics. I mean, because of the way we were treated in Europe, treated in France, we were compelled to become highly ethnocentric. Those kinds of Swedes, and those Swedes will tell me that they see the Swedes in America as really quite different from them. I actually had someone on this channel who was a Swedish pastor who was occupying some land in Norway, and he was saying to me, I agree with you. I have no problem discussing this. But it's Swedes that are in America. So why do you think it's the American Swedes that seem to have an issue with this?
Because the thing is about these people is that they're foreign. Fundamentally, is what characterizes them as they're foreign and different from us. And it's one thing over there in their homeland, where they've got their own place. Here, they're visitors. Here they're interlopers, and there's this sort of game where they have to blend in at once. They're sort of playing the part of a native, but at the same time, there's sort of this other identity there. And so to me, that's really the crux of it between the Swedish diaspora and the sort of Swedish nationalists, is that over here and in sort of Western, Southern Europe, not Northern Europe where they reside, they have got to play the part of, they're fellow Americans, they're fellow Europeans. They're not so dissimilar from us.
I know a Swedish American, and he's one of the most intelligent people I know, and not just that, but one of the most intellectually daring people I know. He'll dare to talk about race, and he got in a lot of trouble for arguing that philosophically that we should discuss race differences, and everything. He's rigorously logical, except the Swedish question, and except that kind of stuff where no, suddenly he will throw every fallacious argument he can. I know we've all got our blind spots, perhaps. People have said my blind spot is Toryism. I don't know. Some people would argue yours is Catholicism. I don't know, but his is definitely his Swedishness, and it's sad in a way, because I have a chap I've had on here who's a Jamaican, and he's based, and he doesn't have any blind spots about this. He's perfectly happy to discuss, all of these reasonable issues. I just don't know why he has to have it. But yes, but apart from the Swedish question, though.
Now, before we continue, I'd like to do something rather exciting. I know that you Generation Z people, you want to have read all of the based books, you want to have imbibed all of the most radical and important scientific knowledge, but you don't particularly like reading very much. So what if there was an app that would take those books, summarize them for you, and then read them back to you in less than 25 minutes? Well, fortunately, such an app exists, and that app is called Legion.com. They have, for example, my book, The Past is a Future Country, The Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution, by myself and my friend Ollie Rayner Hills, in which we look at the way that there is clearly going to be a shift based on breeding patterns among the more intelligent back towards us being right-wing, and the return, therefore, of a kind of genetically right-wing society, a kind of neo-Byzantium. And here it is, The Past of the Future Country. And so you don't even have to read the book if you don't want to. This can inject it straight from the phone into your brain box. And if you sign up today with the code TJH, then of course you can get a 10% discount. So Legion.com, sign up now. All the base knowledge from your phone direct to your brain.
Well, you've had a lot. Could you tell me about that? You've basically kind of been martyred. You've suffered for your art, haven't you? I mean, you're on a no-fly. Can you tell me a bit about the January the 6th and the sort of consequences thereof?
Yes. So since January 6th, right away, I got banned from everything. I got banned from Facebook and Instagram and DLive, and even my payment processor, which was supposed to be like more or less censorship proof, not even a well-known one. I was banned from them. And that all happened immediately. And then I was banned from back-end services, like we used Email Octopus, and we used Amazon AWS, and we were trying to use StackPath for live streaming, their CDN. We were banned from all that, we found nearly every bank, every payment processor, and that was for openers. Then the FBI seized about $500,000 from my bank account. Then I was put on a federal no-fly list, which You know, a lot of people don't even understand how that works, but I cannot board a plane in America. I cannot board a domestic flight, an international flight. I can't even print a ticket to get on a plane. It's not like I go through security and they stop me. I can't even get a ticket for a plane. And so those have been probably the most dramatic consequences. The latest is that
you haven't been, sorry to interrupt, you haven't been found guilty of a crime.
No, I haven't even been indicted or charged with the crime, let alone convicted or sentenced.
But it's because you gave a rabble-rousing speech on January the 6th that you I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, it was because I was there. I don't even think it was for the speech. Honestly, you know what it was is that in December of 2020, December 2020, I received this large Bitcoin donation from this guy in France. It had nothing to do with Stop the Steal. It had nothing to do with the Capitol. But yet, after January 6th, and so there's sort of a few things happening here, which was just like the perfect storm. So this donation happens like December 9th, 2020. And this is before anybody's even talking about doing a rally at the Capitol on the 6th. But that's when it occurs. It's completely unrelated. I think one leftist tweeted about it maybe a week after it happened. And then, you know, sort of people forgot about it. Then I go there on the 6th and I don't enter the Capitol. I don't breach the actual building. But people say that I did. Somebody misidentifies me and they say, oh, Nick was in there with Baked Alaska. And this post goes viral and it's got 50,000 likes, probably 100 million impressions. It's all over the media. They're reporting that I was in the Capitol. And then because people said I was inside the Capitol, some journalists started to dig up that donation and say, oh, well, maybe this had something to do with this. And so they wrote up this big report, submitted it to the government. And then the government suspected that it was, and this is the crux of it, foreign funding with cryptocurrency for an insurrection. And that, I think that's really the reason why me in particular, I'm on the no-fly list in these things. It was that it was from another country. It was in crypto. It was a large donation. And it was the proximity to the Capitol that then you've got foreign intelligence involved. You've got the FBI involved where they say, oh, this guy was sponsored by another government to like overthrow America, which is obviously a much bigger deal than you broke a window. It's a much bigger deal.
Can I interject there? I didn't get the impression. If I was going to organize an insurrection, I'd organize it a lot better than that. I got the impression from watching it, and okay, they're gonna slant it from what we see in a certain light and whatever. But it was just sort of lower middle class Americans that got a bit over the top. As can happen when they're they're losing their country. Let's face it, they're sliding into minority status, and it's not going to be a nice minority status. It's going to be a vengeful and unpleasant. It's not going to be a good time. If you look at the research of Peter Turkin, we're at a high level of polarization anyway, so it's going to be quite unpleasant what's going to go on. I suspect America is going to break up. And so you've got all this going on with people that aren't, I think, frankly, intelligent enough to be able to articulate this. And they've got a few people, and so they get overexcited and they misbehave in much the same way that BLM did. Got overexcited and misbehaved. You can see if you're a black person in America and you see lots of black people and they're always in low status and whatever, then one way you'll cope with it is by saying, oh, well, it must be them trying to get us down. And then if you get people that are inciting you to think that, then you're going to, a lot of people will be incited to riot and whatever. But we say, okay, well, yeah, that's true. But it's also true with white people. And I find it extraordinary that they could say it's not an insurrection. It's a joke. I mean, like they got in there and one person was shot, and then that was the end of that. If this was a genuine insurrection, if one person being shot, that would make them go further. They keep going. But it's amazing they could say it's an insurrection, I think.
Yeah, it was a riot. And everybody who was there knows that. And the thing is, and this is funny, I knew people inside the admin who were working on Stop the Steal. And you know where Stop the Steal was being ran out of it? Here's what I should say is the Trump legal team gave up. Like the day after the election, they said, yeah, we're not overturning this. Forget about it. So as far as legal arguments about overturning the election, where that came from in the administration, it was coming from Peter Navarro's office. It was coming from the trade office. there was a guy in there who's a friend of mine, and he was a young kid running the well, he's I think a year older than me, but young guy running the operation out of that office. And I tell people, you know, my lawyer, when I first met my lawyer, he's asking me, okay, did this insurrection happen? Blah, blah, blah. I told him, I said, the Trump administration was literally too incompetent by far to even plan an insurrection. They couldn't plan the most basic stuff, let alone overthrowing the government. And that goes for the whole deal, the admin, the campaign, the Stop the Steal movement. I mean, you had the most petty infighting and bickering between even the Stop the Steal organizers, like Women for America First with the Creamer sisters and Ali with Stop the Steal, and all these different factions. There's just so much dysfunction in the Trump movement, the MAGA movement. If you were to tell anybody that they were going to overthrow the government, they would laugh at you because they couldn't do it. And that's not what it was. It was a hastily organized rally, which then turned into a riot. And like you said, like BLM.
Yeah, but except the BLM had people backing it and kind of egging it on, who were highly intelligent Machiavellian sort of people, like the media and so on. Whereas Stop This thing, you know, at the Capitol didn't. It didn't have that to its advantage, really. It didn't have people saying that it was fiery but mostly peaceful or anything like that. It had people portraying it in the most negative light possible. I feel sorry for them, really. I mean, it's like a lot of these people, when I've been in America, frankly, the standard of living in some areas of America, I don't know how much you've been to Europe, but is way below anything that would be tolerated in Europe. It's unbelievable. I mean, you've got people living in sheds, literally what we would have in our garden to put tools in. I was in the Navajo Nation. I went to the Grand Canyon, and the people they live in sheds. They're sheds, and not even very nice sheds. I mean, it's. My grandfather had a better shed than that to put his tools in the garden, and there's the house. I mean, it's unbelievable what they live like. So I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy for them. Okay, those people are Native Americans, but there's a lot of white people that live like that. It's appalling. Yeah. No, it's not. What do you think though? How do you think this is going? How do you think this is going to pan out? Like, what do you think is going to happen over the next sort of 10, 20? Well, by the time you're my age, 20 years hence or so, how do you think America's going to be by then?
Well, it's difficult to say because, you know, I think the writing is on the wall. People talking about secession, national divorce, balkanization, these kinds of things. And I would agree with that. But there's a question about how does a technological industrial state like the United States government, how does that fall apart? I don't know that it necessarily does. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, you know, because let's say, for example, and you could sort of see where the fault lines would be. There is this, they call it the Clinton archipelago and the Trump, what do they call it? But, you know, you've got this giant red landmass from, you could say, eastern Washington state all the way down to Florida. And you've got Idaho, Montana, you know, down through, you know, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, all the way through to Florida. And sort of on the east and west, you've got the West Coast. We've got, of course, the entire West Coast. You've got those big cities in the Northeast and sort of down towards the Mid-Atlantic and in the Midwest. And so those would be sort of the fault lines of what a secession would look like, what sort of two emerging nations would look like. And you could even see a scenario where a governor gains control of one of the bigger states like Texas and Florida, and they begin to resist the federal government. And there's sort of this there's this dynamic where the federal government is putting down rules and trying to exert their supremacy over the states, and the states disobey, and a conflict is forced. And how far does the federal government go? Does it send in troops? Does it put it down? Is there another civil war? That's
an interesting question, because we are we are in a context in which everything is about equality and harm avoidance. That's what we go for. Those are the two moral foundations that they're up for, rather than the group-oriented foundations of obedience to authority and sanctity and in-group loyalty. It's all harm avoidance. We've abolished the death penalty in most places. We've certainly abolished corporal punishment. But your children can't even come last in races these days in case it hurts their feelings. So therefore, I can't see them acting lethally. That's the thing. In other circumstances, if you go back to the 50s or whatever, even then, yeah, I could see them sending in the troops and acting lethally and shooting, killing. But it seems to me that, like, even in what happened on January the 6th, I would imagine that you should have had a situation where they should never have got near the Capitol, because there were people guarding the Capitol. Why didn't they have guns? Why weren't they met? One of them was like some short woman that they managed to push over. That's stupid. They should have had men that were at least 6 foot tall with guns, and then it would never have happened. But harm avoidance and equality, that's how it got to them getting in there, really. So I think that they would do everything, like with Russia now. They will do everything they can to avoid actually doing the traditional. So I think it just takes someone. Maybe Trump should do that rather than run for president again. He should run to be in charge of some red state, Texas, let's say, and then just take that state out, and then other states will follow.
I think that's how something like that would play out, and then there's sort of this open question. And maybe this is from the Cold War. I don't know. Domestically, certainly, it's like you described, that they're not shooting on people, but we're seeing more of these things. We're seeing things begin to crack up, like with this Canada Freedom Convoy and January 6th. And there's sort of this increasingly open rebellion against the globalist world order. And they're trying to find ways to deal with this. In Canada, you just have these giant trucks in the capital, and at the border, people can't get stuff through. And they're like, okay, well, how can we coerce these people to move? Well, we're past the point of, Justin Trudeau's just going to give a speech, or they're going to browbeat the people on social media, or even make accusations like, oh, they vandalized a statue and trying to turn public opinion against them. They said there's no police solution here. So what does that mean? A military solution? And so it's interesting to see. There's going to be one of these flashpoints where there will be an impasse, and then things will be different after that, is my opinion. Because like with the Capitol on January 6th, Trump told everybody to go home, and then they did. And now they're trying to create this new war on terror and everything after the fact. But now you've got this freedom convoy, and they're telling them to go home, and they won't do it. And so at some point in the Western world, Western Europe or North America, probably America, you're going to see, like you said, someone's just going to say no. And they're going to be immovable. There'll be maybe a charismatic leader. There'll be somebody with a lot of support. And then what is going to happen? Is the government going to sort of enforce its authority? Because once the authority has lost its legitimacy, then all it has is force. If the people who are rebelling don't believe the government is ruling legitimately, then all that's left to keep the authority is that they're being coerced with open and naked force. And will the government do that? I think they might. I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. It would be unprecedented. And I think that based on what we've seen in the past, probably it seems unlikely. But when there's an open challenge against the government, and you see the kind of rhetoric that's going on where they say, oh, the Americans are terrorists and this kind of stuff, it's sort of a delicate situation, because if the government does violence against the people and tries to crush a rebellion, do you exacerbate the rebellion? I mean, this is an age-old question. So maybe that's why there's an aversion to force, as they know that if 70 million people revolted, all that voted for Donald Trump.
It's before your time. You won't remember this, but of course you don't. You were born in 1998. But the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and it was like that. Everybody had lost confidence. Nobody believed the lies anymore, and people sort of gradually realized that other people thought the same way as them, even though you couldn't say so in public, until something just broke. Until some in the case of the communism, it was a mistake. It was some German official under stress misunderstanding his instruction, and then the body of people coming towards the wall wanting to go through was so huge that they just let them through, and then that news spread from radio stations on the border where they could pick up foreign radio, and off it went. But there was just this gradual loss of confidence and a loss of fear. They didn't fear them anymore because they knew that other people didn't. And then it just sort of spread. So I suppose it would be that. But we don't really fear the government, though, do we? We fear the blue hairs. We fear the people. We fear the woke mob. So it would be knowing that the woke mob are toothless and they're impotent for ordinary people that are more neurotic than us, I suppose. That would do it. That would be it. Another thing I was going to ask before we move on to questions is what is it? I'd just like to withdraw something. So I wrote in a book that I have coming out later this year. I said that we're going to have a conservative demographic revolution based on who's having children. There's going to be a tipping point because it's the conservatives that have children, and then we're going to tip back towards conservatism. And I specifically wrote, you will see the percolation upwards into academia of Nick Fuentes types, or perhaps more cerebral incarnations of him. But I have to say, you do seem quite cerebral. It is now, unfortunately, we're at the galley stage, so it's too late for me to edit that out. But don't get offended when the book comes out. But because all I'd seen of you was you laughing and whatever on your stream. You know, I hadn't seen much in the way of a sort of coherent discussion. It was all the laughing and and groiping and all this anyway. But so can you tell me a little bit about that? Like what was it you think that was the kind of the magic of America First and of your channel?
Well, no offense taken. That's very funny. I get that a lot, and I always.
Are you ready for the future of the West? Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear the full thing, as well as help with my other projects, then please become a subscriber at jollyheretic.com.